course, the college football season has been complete for Iowa for about 10 days, but officially in the books now that Georgia has defeated Alabama for the national championship and the 2021 campaign is complete. We will talk Iowa football, of course, right here at the Voice of College Football on our Hawkeyes live show with you for the next 60 minutes. So please leave your comments and your questions right there in the live chat, and we will get to as many as possible. This show is only possible because of this guy, Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm. So while you should be subscribed here, also make sure you're subscribed over on From the Hawkeye of the Storm right here on YouTube. Corey, how you doing?
Doing good, Mark. You mentioned the Georgia-Alabama game last night. I'm happy to share with our listeners that we talked about it going into the game. Don and I released a segment right before the game, about 6:30 Central Time yesterday, about the top 5 parameters that were essential to victory, which, interestingly enough, in the SEC championship game, Alabama won all 5, which, if you're an analytics guru, that's really tough to do, which told Don that perhaps Nick Saban... Obviously, Nick Saban is a complete guy. I mean, obviously, I think you could make the argument he's the best coach in the history of college football. There's probably a good chance he knew what those parameters were. So yesterday, interestingly enough, Georgia didn't flip the script, but they evened those parameters out. So it was actually a tie for the top 5. So second quarter scoring was a tie. Rushing yardage was won by Georgia. Total offense by Bama. Red zone efficiency by Georgia, and then explosive plays by Alabama. So, you split those parameters down the middle, and I don't know where again, I don't have the 6 through 11 parameters or whatnot, but just kind of an interesting, I'm always intrigued by that. I enjoyed Don's research, and Georgia earned it there, with the quarterback that struggled at times, even yesterday. And it's just a great story. I'm happy for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I thought it was an entertaining game. I'm a bit fatigued by the SEC, as many people are. So I will admit that as a guy who comes on here not as a Big Ten guy or a supporter of a particular team in regards to what I do here. So that's not necessarily good for business, but I'll just be honest. The landscape of college football has been in the SEC's camp for quite some time. But I had to kind of channel my thought to, I just want to see the best 2 teams in the country, which I believe they are, and just enjoy it for what it is. These are 2 extremely talented NFL-laden teams. Just enjoy the product on the field and the effort and the talent, and not necessarily get caught up in the narrative of let's represent all the conferences and have a better product for that's going to gain more national appeal, and put that to the side for 3.5 hours and just enjoy the football, which I thought was an outstanding football game.
Yeah, and conferences aside, Mark, I think you and I both agree that the sport of college football needs more parity. I compare it a little bit to the era of the Big Four in tennis, because I'm a big tennis guy, and I'm talking about Roger Federer, Novak Djokovic, Rafa Nadal, and Andy Murray, especially the top 3. Andy Murray kind of got in the mix there as well, but there was a period of years where those 4 guys basically won every major, and most of those were won by Roger Federer, and then it kind of shifted to Novak. But my point is, even Clemson, like I seeing a team from the ACC other than Clemson would be good. I'm certainly happy Georgia won that game yesterday, because Alabama winning it again to me is not helpful at all to the sport, in my opinion. But seeing a team like Ole Miss get back would be kind of a cool story. But again, you're right. It would be nice to see. Honestly, I'm not an anti-Pac-12 guy. I'm not an anti-Big 12 guy. I think the Big 12, we've talked about, the Big 12 is going to be in a precarious situation potentially, although they helped their cause with some nice additions. But it was just good to see Georgia win, get an underdog story. And the story, the Stetson Bennett story, is a tremendous one. I'm very anxious to see what happens with him this offseason. I watched a good part of your show yesterday. I saw George try to call in about 3 or 4 times, which I know you appreciated.
Like under some aliases.
Under some aliases.
And I played along once to let him actually believe that he was fooling me, but then the line just suddenly dropped.
Yeah, I noticed that. Just miraculous. That was a shame. But anyways, no, I enjoyed your show last night, Mark, and But no, I enjoyed the game. I enjoyed the fourth quarter. Honestly, the game itself was not that great until you got to the fourth quarter. And to me, it was just, again, a kind of a storybook ending in a weird kind of way for Stetson Bennett and that offense. So, and obviously, that defense carried that team. But there's no question that I think that they're the best team in college football. I mean, you can make the argument that it's Bama because they did win in the SEC title game, but Georgia was the most dominant team the entire year. Now, I don't know. I'd have to look back. I'm sure Alabama did it. Maybe Clemson did it, Mark. But has there ever been a year where the team that was number one in all the polls for as long as Georgia was ended up winning the championship? Do you know? Has there been that dominant of a display week in and week out, at least in this era?
Yeah, so I don't know at what point in the season Georgia ascended to number one. They were a top 3 to 4 the first week. They beat Clemson, which was, of course, a monumental win. They were like 2-4, 2-3 in the country, something in that range. So they probably got a ton of number one votes. And I think once they, I don't know, it was very early in the season, yes, that they ascended to number one, that they would have gone close to wire. I will be logging that in the back of my head while we continue the discussion, and I'll try to get an answer to you if something comes across my mind.
I know, just from my memory, I'm just thinking from week in and week out, it was clear that they were number one, and nobody questioned that. And again, I know that maybe there was some question late, especially when you lose to Alabama in the title game, but boy, just a impressive display. And yeah, you want the best team winning. That's kind of how it should be. Not what we think to be the best team. I think they're the best team. I do think it's very obvious going back to the playoff, which I think I tweeted out over the weekend, because wasn't there a meeting about the playoff being expanded?
Yes.
That and basically there was no movement, correct?
They're at a stalemate right now.
What are we stalemating? What is so hard about this, Mark?
They're at a stalemate over some. Now I need to read into it because that came out possibly on Sunday, and I was just wrapped up in so many things that I didn't get around to it, but I really wanted to look into it. But I know that there are some very, what I would consider to be minor tweaks to the system that you wouldn't think that they would get hung up on. For example, the Pac-12 seems to be hung up on this one. They want there to be protection for the 5 major conferences, the Power 5, to all have its champion in the field, and then the highest ranked group of 5. Okay, the counter proposal is to have the top 6 ranked conference champions. You would think that that would be the exact same thing almost all the time. And I'm here to say that off the top of my head, it is. But I don't know if that's the Pac-12 basically forecasting its own continued demise, that it's going to be actually the 7th highest ranked conference champion at some point, that it would be an issue that they would have to protect itself.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. But let's be honest, the Pac-12 was not very good this year.
No.
Was the Pac-12 as bad as it's been during your lifetime? Was it as bad as it's ever been this year?
This is the worst it's ever been.
Yeah, that's alarming. And let me just say this, and I don't want to segue into, it seems like every week you and I sit down here and we talk about the offense, we talk about quarterback in the portal. And, I understand some people probably get tired of hearing it. I get tired of talking about it, frankly, but I know there's a lot of people that are intrigued by it still. And right now, I mean, the season's over. What else do we have to talk about besides recruiting and the portal? So the fact that Jayden de Laura, who I'd been pining for a few days, found a home within 4 days. Now, maybe he wanted, you can use, there are ways you can spin this. Maybe he's from Hawaii. Maybe he wanted to play in warm weather. He went to possibly the worst Power 5 team in the country, in the worst conference in the country. So this garbage, people telling me this garbage, that Iowa can't attract a big name portal quarterback because of style. Yeah, it's real stylish going to a 1-11 Arizona Wildcats team. Give me a break. Okay. I couldn't. Now, I have nothing against Delora. He went there probably because they pursued him, right? They didn't. Arizona must not have a defeatist attitude, Mark. They don't have that loser mentality of, well, we could never attract him. No, they said, we need him. We've got problems. We need the reigning offensive freshman of the year in the Pac-12. So they went out and got him. So I'm proud of who's even the head coach at Arizona now?
It is Jedd Fisch, former offensive coordinator at UCLA.
No idea who that is, but attaboy Jedd. That's what I would say. Attaboy Jedd, because that program is in the dumps right now. And it's a good program, I think, overall. Maybe I'm wrong.
Former offensive coordinator at Michigan, Jedd Fisch.
And I remember, back during 2009, Iowa's 2009, 2010 stretch where they had a lot of talent on that roster. They had a home and home with Arizona. And that was, I'm trying to think of who was on that Arizona team. Nick Foles was the quarterback.
Yeah.
They lost. Iowa lost down there in 2010 in an ugly, ugly game.
I remember that.
So that's a good program, but man, they're in the dumps. And the fact that they were able to go get Jayden de Laura, I don't want to hear people that tell me that no quarterback wants to come to Iowa. Now, I do want to share something, Mark. I'm not necessarily I'm not at all a message board guy, but again, when college football's over and you're lying in bed late at night and you're scouring, trying to look for something football related to feed on, sometimes you come upon ridiculousness. And I just want to share this. Again, I wouldn't normally do it, but given the circumstances, I'll read this comment. So I'm not going to name who these posters are, but I'm going to give Iowa fans on here an example. And this is just my opinion as to what fans, I should say, continue to enable that defeatist attitude at Iowa. These are the people. If you wonder why it isn't so obvious to everybody, including the coaching staff, why Iowa should go out to the portal and get a quarterback, this is why. All right. Again, this is an anonymous poster. This poster says, in response to a question about Iowa bringing in a transfer portal quarterback, he says, and I quote, "Bringing in a transfer quarterback is a horrible idea for a team like Iowa. Terrible, terrible idea. Bringing in transfer quarterbacks at a school like Iowa will destroy what little recruiting power we have at that position. Let's say Kurt goes to the portal and finds some wonder boy gunslinger from Upper East Tampa Bay State. And in parentheses, remember, no elite quarterback is going to leave their situation to come to Iowa. Say he has 2 years of eligibility left. What do you think is going to happen in the quarterback room? Petrus, gone. Padilla, gone. Labus, gone. In today's day and age, no one is sticking around if someone's ahead of them and potentially reducing their window of playing years. They can go somewhere else and play immediately. Yeah, because there's a lot of Power 5 schools that Spencer Petras is going to transfer to, and he's going to play immediately. And then how do you recruit quarterbacks in the future after doing that? Say we're in a battle over a good QB with Michigan State or Minnesota or whoever. You think the opposing coach isn't going to say, hey, man, Ferentz loves to surf the portal for quarterbacks, and remember what happened a few years ago with Petras and Padilla. I'd hate to see you commit somewhere and have something like that happen to your career. Here at blankety blank state, we're loyal to our scholarship guys, and we want to see you succeed. The transfer shopping can work at a big school like Michigan or Ohio State or even Penn State. They're big enough names that they can still pull good players in just by their stature. Doing that blankety blank at Iowa, when you've already got a senior, junior, and freshman in the room, would be a blankety blank suicide, and it'd have repercussions for years. What if Wonder Boy got hurt or didn't work out? What are you going to do then? I mean, this is the mindset, Mark. This is the mindset of a fan base. And it's not everybody. I know there's a huge faction of the fan base that's completely the opposite. But the fan base is so divided on this issue. And this is the enabling. If everybody, including the most important people, the people who are donating thousands, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there are people out there who are donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to the program, if they were the ones to push back, change would happen. You and I both know that's how change happens. Unfortunately, sometimes it's the people with the money that are the ones that begin change. So, but there are people out here who actually believe this, Mark. And not only do they believe it, they believe it's fact. There isn't a doubt about it. We can't have a discussion. There isn't a doubt. It's a line in the sand So why are we even talking about it? It's so, like you say, terrible, horrible, just these broad observations. And it's just it's sad. And here's the problem. It's not an issue with just quarterback. Like this is a microcosm of an attitude amongst a lot of fans. There are fans out there that don't believe that Brian should be moved along. And I'm not saying he's Kirk's son. That's it. He's the answer. And I'm sitting here thinking, what earth am I living on? And I don't understand where that comes from, but there are people who actually believe these things. And that's why no movement will occur, because there are enablers within the fan base that will never, ever approve of change.
I think that a lot of fans believe that their program is unique in some way. And of course, every program is unique, just like every individual is unique, but in some kind of special way that these kind of things can happen elsewhere, but we do it differently here. We are the only one who operates like this, and this works for us. Yeah, I do think that just getting a little bit closer to the program and the ways of the program and the approach based on our conversations, that I think there's a very there is an element of a stodgy, outdated kind of approach to running a football operation. And the consistency, the stability, all of that works, but people need to adapt and change with the changing landscape. And this is a huge part of it, is talent acquisition.
It's such a ridiculous, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, Mark, because you know more than this yahoo on a message board about the landscape of college football and what programs are utilizing the transfer portal. So are you telling me, because according to some yahoo like this, according to him, if you bring in, let's just say, I'm not even going to shoot for the stars. Let's just say Jarrett got 1 year of eligibility remaining. So you're telling me that if Iowa brings in Daggy, that Labus is transferring, that Petrus is transferring, that Padilla's gone, and May's going to decommit. Is that really going to happen? Is that reasonable? Does that happen when teams bring in transfer portal quarterbacks? Is that happening?
That is not happening to date. Of course, at some point, you can think that if you get to a certain number of scholarship players at that position, somebody's going to leave. So first of all, the fans need to not be afraid of, and hopefully the coaching staff is not afraid of, this new landscape that attrition is now part of the deal. So you got to get comfortable with that first and foremost. Not that you want it, not that you don't want to retain, not that you don't want to limit and prevent to a certain extent, and do what you possibly can to, of course, have an attractive program and one that supports the student athletes, to show that you care about them and you're going to develop them in all areas of life to make it the best possible situation for them. So not that you just have this carefree attitude that, hey, players come and go. No, not at all. But you have to be comfortable with the attrition. It's like playing the stock market. You have to be comfortable with, hey, if you purchase 10 stocks and 7 or 8 hit, that you're going to lose 2 or 3 times, and you don't freak out when the 2 or 3 lose money. The other 7 or 8 are hitting. You're winning. You're good. It's the same thing here. It's just the way the sport is now structured.
I'm just trying to figure out, Mark, is that so? Again, because that is the mindset. It's not just what's one guy, and I'm sorry to pick on him, but when you draw a line in the sand and it's just law, you just make it law. There's no debate. Then I'm gonna critique it, because you're telling me then that Pittsburgh and Nebraska and Auburn and Oregon and Washington State, and I mean, I can go down the list, Virginia Tech, all these schools that have acquired transfer portal quarterbacks. And you can say, well, Corey, they lost quarterbacks. A lot of those schools did. But you know what? Washington State lost to Laura, and that's it. There have not been mass exits of their quarterback room. Okay. So you may lose. I'm not saying that if they bring in Burmeister or Daggy or they're not going to get Jackson Dart, but we can again, another guy we can dream about. I'm not saying that if they did that you're not going to lose somebody. But again, Nebraska and Pittsburgh and these schools, they added somebody quality because they don't currently have quality. Whether that's because somebody left for the league or somebody transferred, they needed an upgrade from their current room. They had quarterbacks on scholarship, but they needed better quality quarterbacks now. And Iowa, I don't care if it's a full room right now, they need better quality quarterbacks now, regardless if it's because they're not performing or they left.
So this issue seems to be morphing into another issue that I hear not only with Iowa, but with other pretty high-level programs, that there is too much of a culture of tenure, that if you were the first one in line, if you were the first one to grab that spot, that it's forever yours. And even if you're performing at a marginal level and there are other people that could compete for that job, no, you beat that person to the spot, it's yours. And as long as you go to class, have a GPA, and you lift weights and you do all the things we ask you to do, even though you're not performing well on the field or marginally on the field, you're going to keep your job.
Losing mentality.
Yeah, the elite programs of college football don't operate like that. And even coming down levels, most don't. And you can't. It has to be a performance-based situation. And I'm all for rewarding tenure in other ways and rewarding tenure even in terms of playing time if that's the tiebreaker.
Yeah. Absolutely. The way, especially with quarterback play, but every position on the field, it should be how you're performing. And that's just what it is. And so, and I'm not trying to say that Kirk doesn't play the best guy on the roster. But if assuming that he does, giving him the benefit of the doubt, and Spencer Petras is the best guy on the roster, then we need an upgrade. That's just the bottom line. It doesn't, again, it doesn't matter how many quality guys. It doesn't matter if Joey Labus is getting close. He's not ready. And this kind of delves into our next subject I wanted to touch on this afternoon, Mark, and that is the Big Ten Conference did announce that they will be announcing some adjustments in the 2022 schedules, and they'll be announcing those tomorrow at 11 a.m. on BTN. And I know that they're supposed to account for some of the changes that were made during the 2020 abbreviated schedule, because remember there was a different schedule released for some teams. I don't believe, and I could be wrong on this, but I don't believe Iowa's schedule was really changed at all for the 2020 schedule. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't anticipate it changing at all tomorrow. The reason why it's intriguing is because we've talked about how tough Iowa's schedule is next year. But I don't have any reason to think they haven't played Ohio State since 2017. So I don't have any reason to think they're going to drop that game and get somebody else from the East. Rutgers is built into the schedule for the next several years. Michigan, they haven't played in the regular season since 2019. So I just, do you know any more about that, what those changes are going to contain?
I really don't. I did not know that this was taking place until a couple hours ago when some Ohio State beat writers contacted me just to adjust our show time and said there's a conference goal and a show on BTN with the schedule changes. And I thought Big Ten schedule changes for next season, and I didn't inquire anything more about it. Man, I can't even go back in my memory and think to what the changes were for the 2020. Obviously, the schedule was truncated, but in any such way that would cause the Big Ten to analyze it and think that there was some kind of fairness issue.
Yeah, if anything, I would think schools would be doing this because the non-conference schedule was scrapped. I wouldn't think the conference would get involved. So I don't know what, obviously this is a conference only adjustment. So for Iowa fans, Nevada, South Dakota State, and Iowa State are still locked in there. But I don't know. I don't know, but it will be interesting to see. And I looked back at 2019, 2020, 2021, and just to make sure we're on schedule, there were no, like Iowa played at home against Purdue in 19, on the road in 20, and at home in 21. So we're on schedule. And I think we're on schedule with every one of our West opponents. There was no change in 2020 due to COVID. We thought there might be because of travel and different things, but there wasn't. So I don't really know what that change will be. My guess is it won't be anything for Iowa. Now, maybe dates will change, and that's significant if you're Iowa, Mark, because remember we talked about that gauntlet early. They play at Minnesota, they play at Purdue, they play at Ohio State and home Michigan. Bang, 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 bang. So they're going to have, if there's a schedule change, they're going to potentially benefit from that, I believe, tomorrow morning. But we'll see. I really have no idea what it's going to be.
And yeah, so again, you believe that these are COVID related, COVID season related, 2020.
That's what Blair Sanderson of
Okay.
Rivals tweeted out earlier today.
All right.
That it was in a response to some of the changes that were made in 2022.
I wonder if there's a situation where a number of these non-conference matchups can be made up, and that's affecting the conference schedule.
Yeah, that could be. That certainly could be. Yeah. So I don't know. I will say this. I saw a comment here from Joe that just joined. Yep. So recap on who's off the board at quarterback. Delores gone. Cameron Ward from Incarnate Word is gone. Jackson Dart entered from USC. I wouldn't be surprised if Iowa State pursues him. Iowa State pursued him at a high school and offered. So I don't know if they've got any. Do you have any ideas to where he could end up, Mark?
Not offhand, no.
And for anybody that doesn't know, Jackson Dart was the starter at USC. He kind of pushed Keaton Slovis out, right? I mean, that was part of.
There was an injury involved, but Keaton Slovis was healthy enough to play and come back and play, and they didn't reinsert Keaton Slovis.
Right. So, and Dart was he a 5-star kid? Or a 4-star kid?
I think he was quite a 5-star. He was a 4-star out of Utah who ascended rapidly. Like, he wasn't even the starting quarterback at his high school for most of his career. And then his senior season just took off. He was one of these workout wonders in these elite camps, and he took off, and USC signed him.
But I hate to say this. I've kind of worn myself out on the hope of having hope that Iowa's going to make a move. They're not going to make a move, Mark. I hate to just be negative, but that's not going to happen. Not at this point.
So this is the mindset that we're seeing here with Kirk Ferentz, is that basically I think that he's honoring that he has a starting quarterback, if not 2 starting quarterbacks. And despite the level of play, I already have a starting quarterback. So why would I hit the transfer portal? Maybe I would if we had a departing starting quarterback, then I would need to hit the transfer portal.
I'm frankly surprised that Alex Padilla hasn't entered the portal, Mark. I mean, that surprises me. Maybe he'll stick around because from his perspective, does he have a better chance starting here or leaving and going to another Power 5 program? Now, maybe he would rather, there's some guys that would probably rather start at a group of 5 than have to have the chance of riding the bench on a Power 5. But he's got a better chance starting here.
He also may want to go through spring practice and see where he stands and give it one more shot.
Yeah, and if he does that, I don't know where he would end up. Maybe he would end up a level down, but that's really going to be a challenge for Iowa, because then you're literally stuck with 2 guys. Carson May's not getting here till summer. He's not starting this fall. I mean, of all the things for Kirk Ferentz to change, I think that would be the least likely. He's not going to start a true freshman who didn't even get a spring practice, barring an emergency. So in that case, if Padilla leaves after spring, you're talking about a Petrus versus Labus. And that's just not very much competition, Mark.
Yeah. Well, sometime between the end of spring practice and throughout the summer, we will be evaluating all the Iowa positional units, and we will evaluate them also against the rest of the Big Ten. And at quarterback, it's not going to be a pretty ranking.
No, it's not. No, and it shouldn't be. Anybody that wants to make that argument that, that's the problem. We say it over and over again. I think Spencer Petras is a great guy, but there is only so much for him to improve on. Like, he's not going to be mobile. He's just not going to be mobile. He can work on speed and agility all he wants. He can make some small improvements, but he's always going to be who he is. And there are certain things I wish Iowa would teach him that he could do with who he is, but there's always going to be that ceiling when you have that type of quarterback.
why can't Iowa, through both recruiting and development, have a passing attack the level of Purdue's?
I have no idea. All I know is going back to some of these comments that I was telling you about, Mark. One of those comments was, let me read you this one. Same guy, by the way. Bringing in a transfer quarterback is a short-term solution that will cause more problems than it solves. Positional players, that's a different story. You have way more guys vying for offensive line, D-line, wide receiver, etc., than you do for quarterback, which is a singular position, the most difficult to learn on the team and the hardest by far to recruit. And in all these comments that I keep reading, all these fans, and again, I respect what fans have to say when you don't draw the line in the sand, but all these fans keep bringing up how hard it is for Iowa's offense. It's a complex offense. And Alex Padilla, brought up in bowl prep that it takes a year and a half to completely learn this offense, Mark. And that's really ridiculous. From what I know, and I'm not a coach, I've not played at that level, but from what I know, a year is probably adequate to completely learn the ins and outs of an offense. If you take in a year and a half, you're doing something wrong, even from a dedication to learning standpoint or from a teaching standpoint. So that's just my take on it.
Yes, when you're thinking a complete off season, you obviously can have your nose in the playbook every hour of every day. Not that we would encourage that, but it's available to you all the time. The discussions are available at any time. And then in terms of the physical workouts, you're looking at winter conditioning. You're looking at spring practice for 3 weeks plus a spring game and multiple opportunities. We focus on the spring game because it's televised, but there are multiple other intra-squad scrimmages that are like the spring game that are just as important to evaluation. And then the individual workouts during the summer and then into August camp. I know Joe Burrow, I'm not going to hold people up to the standard of Joe Burrow, but he basically showed up for the first day of August camp at LSU, not the season that he exploded as a Heisman Trophy winner, but the previous season they finished in the top 6 in the country and he won the Fiesta Bowl. And he showed up at the first day of practice. Then it's the first day he had been at LSU and worked with his teammates. And he was ready to go, bam, week 1 against Texas on the road, scoring 45 points.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example. And I did see somebody in the chat bring up the administration. There's a lot of different facets to this, so some of the problems we see with Iowa's offense. But I was having a conversation the other night with someone, and I'm going to produce some content on this now that we have the off season in front of us. But Iowa, the University of Iowa athletic department is, I think, from what I know, and I've been around, as far as following sports for as long as I have, the majority of my life, Iowa is by far the most stubborn school. And I'm talking athletic department. It's not just football. The most stubborn athletic department that I know of anywhere. Because it's, again, we look at the offense, the refusal to make changes, the refusal to go into the portal for a quarterback, which is an obvious need at Iowa. Even Phil Parker, loved the guy to death, but Iowa's gotten burned by a Purdue receiver like 5 or 6 straight years because we continue to play those receivers the same way every year. We've gotten burned. We've given up over 100 yards to a Purdue receiver, I think 6 straight years, Mark. That's baffling. And alarming, all right? And we gave up over 120 to the same guy for 3 straight years in David Bell. By the way, none of those receivers, in case you're wondering, none of those receivers were Rondale Moore because every time Iowa played him, he was hurt. So think about that for a second. You look at Iowa basketball. Carver Hawkeye Arena is right now, and I know the real Hayden goes to all the Iowa basketball games. It is a absolute sleep fest as far as the crowd is concerned. And it's an exciting team to watch. But the students are lined up behind the baskets. They line them all the way up. There's no middle section. What's the term for when you have an arena and you have there's a term I'm trying to think of. But there's no, you got to walk all the way up the steps. It's basically an underground bowl. Mezzanine. There you go. And I'm not saying you can just build a mezzanine. It was a design from years ago that Iowa can't do much about. There are things you can do, repositioning the students, letting students in for free. We refuse to do any of that. We're content with having no students at Iowa basketball games, having the donors yelling when you stand up and get in their way. So you can't be on your feet and actually cheer for the team you're there for. I mean, these are real problems I hear about. And I haven't even been to Carver this year, but you can see it on television. And then you look at Iowa basketball's defensive problem. And for years, I've been calling for Fran to go hire a defensive coach like Michigan did with John Beilein years ago before they made their deep runs to the Final Four with John and improved to, again, a championship caliber team. And we refuse to do that. So I think it's a stubborn mindset that this university has. And it's sort of a weird concept because Iowa basketball has been moderately successful with Fran. Iowa football has been moderately successful with Kirk. I mean, they just won 10 games. I'm not denying them that. But I think that's sort of what enables the stubbornness, Mark, when you're just good enough to get past the point of the people who are critics are kind of just hushed when they do criticize, because you can always fall back on, well, we won 10 games. Or Iowa basketball made the tournament. They've made the tournament 3 of the last 4 years. How can you complain about that? But see, it's creating a ceiling. Stubbornness at Iowa creates a ceiling that you're never going to break through unless you humble yourself like John Beilein did. And that doesn't surprise me given who John Beilein is, and make a change. And I think Kirk is capable. I think Kirk is a humble guy off the field, but this comes down to him. And it does come down to Gary Barta as the athletic director. But if he's not willing to do anything about it, if Kirk's not willing to do anything about it, Gary's got to step up and do something about it. And if Gary's not willing to do about it, then it's got to be the president that steps up and the board of regents. I mean, there's different ways to handle these situations, but I think I don't want to say it's a culture problem, but there is a stubbornness at Iowa.
Yeah, I would agree. Based on the evidence I know, I wouldn't sit here and proclaim it, but I would confirm that it has that appearance. I wanted to get to something just to clarify something and maybe correct a possible mistake that I made. So Gary is saying that the ACC and the Big Ten commissioners are holding up the playoff proposal. So this is what I heard was, again, I did not take any time, and Corey and I had this conversation before we started to record that I want to get deeper into this, not necessarily on this show, but in regards to my own content in terms of the current playoff proposal. So the original hangup was with the Pac-12. That was one of a few. That was the one that came to mind for me. In this latest go-around, I was told the same thing by Steve Dace at Michigan Podcast. ACC, Big Ten are holding this up. I just kind of assumed that the Pac-12 issue was still there. Apparently, based on Gary's comment, that the Pac-12 has given up its tenant there. But so we will look into that further and address that. But I just wanted to, I don't know that I have a whole lot more to say, but just to emphasize for everyone what I stated a few minutes ago about the Purdue passing attack. So we just watched a season in which, could you imagine if Iowa had Purdue's passing attack? They probably would arrive at the Big Ten championship game undefeated.
I mean, I think they have a chance, certainly.
And so when I make that comparison or that ask, I'm not saying, what if they had Florida such and such or USC such, going to another part of the country where there's different talent base. We're talking about Purdue. Iowa out recruits Purdue. So why can't they have a passing offense?
But Purdue out recruits Iowa at receiver, and it's not even close.
Yes.
So that's a factor. I'm not downplaying the talent on that offense. And honestly, quarterback play, they certainly develop quarterbacks better than Iowa does, right? I mean, they don't have it. Purdue doesn't have a history of these slobber knocker running backs, but when you have the level of skill at receiver and at quarterback that they do, and honestly, quarterback, you get past Drew Brees, what have they produced? David Blau, Elijah Sindelar.
Well, if we want to go, their history is off the charts, ridiculous. You're talking in the last 20 years.
Right.
Before that, it's Len Dawson, Bob Greasy, Mike Phipps, on and on. But in the last 20 years, circa and post Drew Brees, Curtis Painter made it to the NFL and played a little bit. Who am I not thinking of that played in the NFL quite a bit?
Well, David Blau played in the NFL even a couple of years ago.
Yeah, he's still kicking around, I think. Detroit Lions and
Yeah,
elsewhere.
that's
But there's another quarterback I'm not thinking of. Why? Kyle Orton would have been another
Oh, yeah.
NFL quarterback
You're right.
post Breeze. But, we're still talking 15 years ago.
But they have
So,
a dynamic passing attack. I mean, dynamic. So if quarterback isn't this huge gap, then aren't we talking two things: receiver talent and coaching? I mean, what else? What else
maybe
is?
offensive line.
And yet Iowa is known the country
Yeah.
round for its offensive lines.
Yes.
There's a problem there, Mark. Think about what we just. I agree, but
This Purdue
there's some
team this year
delusion.
could throw and catch as well as like top 10 in the country.
Pro Football Focus, who I've ripped on numerous occasions, rated Iowa in mid-November as a top 5 national offensive line. Okay, that's there is the narrative. The narrative fuels the enabling. Mark, the enabling is fueled by this narrative, and by the fans that allow it.
Well, Corey, if our polls, both on Twitter and here on the YouTube channel, are any indication, when you say that there's a divide amongst Iowa fans, at least it's an roughly 80-20 divide in favor of going out and getting a quarterback.
Well, maybe the ones that don't agree with me just don't subscribe. They've unsubscribed by now, Mark. I'm serious. Maybe they just because let's be honest, Mark. People do not want to hear honesty and reality. They want to hear something that fits their belief system, their narrative. So I'm curious to look at. I mean, have you looked at the poll on our channel here?
I thought it was 80-20. I did see it.
Yeah, 168 votes. Now we've got 1,400 some subscribers, so obviously only a small percentage of those people have went to the poll and voted. But the question was, should Iowa pursue Jaden DeLora from Washington State? And you're right, 80% yes, 20% no. So what I just would like to know what the rationale from those 20% are. Is it because of what that fan that I quoted earlier is saying? Because they think it's going to hurt the current quarterback crop, and it's going to hurt recruiting. You don't think Jaden DeLora is the guy? I just have a hard time getting past the fact that it's going to be hard not to upgrade if you go after a guy who's currently starting at the Power 5 level, because Iowa's quarterback play has been near the bottom of the Power 5 level. And honestly, again, Mark, where's Spencer Petras? Where's Alex Padilla? You can throw him in the mix. Where are either one of those guys transferring and starting next year? Is there a single Power 5 team that would take them and start them next year besides Iowa?
Without competition.
Maybe like a Rutgers, maybe like a
Illinois.
Arizona's. I would say Arizona, but they got their guy.
Yeah, they've upgraded. There's 5 schools out there where they would compete in the Power 5.
Yeah. So, and by the way, I do want to address this before we move on, Mark, and then I'll throw it to you. But if you don't mind, I'm going to throw this question up from Raymond, because I know he's sort of talking about basketball, and I respect his opinion because it sounds like he's at the game. So he says, it's nothing Iowa's athletic department does wrong. The fans are just too lazy to come. I am at every game, and they are a blast to be at. It's a lack of caring on the part of the students. So I'm not saying you're wrong, Raymond, because you're at the games, and I agree with you to a degree. But what I'm saying is, if the students aren't coming, and they could come to the games. I think most students can probably afford to pay $5-10 to go to a game. But if the students aren't coming, isn't it the athletic department and the university's responsibility to figure out a way to motivate them to come? Isn't it their job to question and say, why aren't they here? This is an exciting team. We've got a Wooden Award candidate in Keegan Murray, who might be the first round draft pick at Iowa in decades. Isn't it their responsibility to say, what do we need to do to get these kids here?
Yeah, that surprises me, knowing what I know about Iowa basketball past. That they have that good of a player and that good of a team. And so when you're saying that people aren't showing up, what is the average attendance versus capacity? Roughly.
That would be a better question for Raymond, because oftentimes you may be getting attendance of 12, 13,000, and of course the capacity is around 15 at Carver. But how many of those people are actually at games? You might have, and Iowa's schedule hasn't helped. They've played 8 teams that are basically gimmies, cupcakes, right? The schedule was pretty poor. And then they started Big Ten play when students were in finals, were dealing with finals, and then going to break. So I understand, maybe we have to wait a little bit longer, but the fact that we haven't had, I haven't heard any students at these games. And, I haven't personally been at Carver this year because I live in Ames. But I know Gary has been at games. I know Don Patterson has been at Iowa basketball games. And I'm not making this stuff up. It's sad. And you can see when the camera pans up to, and Big Ten Network tries to avoid it, as you know.
Sure.
But when they pan up to the back behind the backboards, it's empty. It's just ridiculous. This is an exciting team to watch. But again, yeah, I agree with Raymond. It's partly the fans, but I think the administration has something to do with trying to figure out a way to motivate them. And I've been saying for a long time, let them in for free, because the return you're going to get on that. And I know there's a lot of programs out there that do. I think Duke lets their students in for free. Now, I could be wrong about that, and I'll have to do some research before I produce more content on that subject. But there are schools that are doing that, and I think Iowa should consider it. But it's not just me. There are people in the Iowa media who have been lobbying for that, and it doesn't do any good, because the donors, the ones that have control of how things operate, they want to have their seats where they've had seats for 20, 30 years, and they want to be comfortable. And even though you would think those wealthy individuals would want the team to play better, which would be assisted by a bigger, better, more student-oriented crowd, unless they get up in arms about it, it's probably not going to change, because we've got a culture of stubbornness in the Iowa athletic department.
There is one topic that I wanted to get in before the end of the show, and this is a topic that a lot of people could care less about. If you're not competing for the playoff, if you're not going to be number one, then who cares? But at the same time, people seem to be, during the course of the season, consumed with rankings. And I love rankings myself. I'm in the rankings, ratings type business. And I was just curious as to your response to, and I got to pull it up to even find where Iowa was ranked. So I've got a top 25 that I produce each and every Sunday, and I produced mine at the end of this season. And I just released that a couple hours ago.
Top 25 that actually
makes sense. Yes.
That's right.
I used to pull the AP and the coaches poll every Sunday and rant and rave about how they didn't make sense. So it finally clicked that I'm going to produce my own top 25 that actually makes sense. So you folks can go and check out to see where I have ranked everyone in my top 25. But in the top 25s, let's see if I can find them. Do you know off the top of your head where I was ranked?
And I believe the coaches. Did both polls come out today? Or are you talking about your poll?
No, I'm talking about the AP and coaches polls. Yeah,
one of them, they were 23. I don't know if that was the coaches or the AP poll. I'm sure somebody will throw it in the chat here in a second when we're talking about it. One of them, they were number 23, and people were complaining they fell so far. Who cares at this point?
So yeah. So do you care where Iowa is ranked?
No, and why would I?
In the final poll.
I'm not saying anybody. Let me just say this: I'm not trying to take away from your poll. All right, because your poll, first of all, does make sense, and I've said that many a time. But honestly, any polls to me at this point in the season mean nothing, because
you don't.
Unless
I was just curious to know whether you cared. Do you care if I was number 17 or they're number 22? You could care less.
But see, the apologists for not the ones that are kind of behind the not wanting to grow and actually ascend. I saw somebody on Twitter say something like, was it this morning? This is like the third straight year Iowa's finished in the top 25, which is the biggest streak. They finished in the top 25 a lot under Kirk, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's more than 3 years, but maybe somebody has that as well. But they're on a streak right now, finishing in the top 25, which I'd rather be finishing in the top 10. But
they finished at 23 in both major polls. So to put that into context, and the teams that you would think would be a direct comparison would, of course, be the teams that they played and had similar records in division. So
are they the lowest ranked 10-win team, Mark? Power 5 10-win team?
It appears so.
That's the way it should be.
I believe so.
I mean, it's the way it should be, right?
So this is what surprises me. So my rankings are quite a bit different than these rankings. These do not have, there is no Wisconsin, Purdue, or Minnesota in the final top 25.
How is there no Minnesota?
I have all three of them in the top 25. How is Purdue not in the top 25? They beat Michigan State. They beat Iowa. Who else did they beat?
Minnesota was 9-4.
So was Purdue. They were all 9-4, and obviously Iowa had the 10th win, 10-4. And that's why I thought it was an interesting comparison. So they have none of them. So in the AP, Wisconsin's 27, Minnesota 28, Purdue 29.
It's interesting because Wisconsin and Purdue spanked Iowa.
Yeah.
So I know head-to-head's not everything. I get that. But Iowa's got 4 losses. Those teams have 4 losses.
And I would argue that the other 3 teams all had tougher schedules.
You don't have to argue. You don't have to argue. I'll argue for Iowa next year, but no, Iowa's schedule this year was one of the worst in the Big Ten. Maybe the worst.
2 of them played Notre Dame non-conference. And there was also just a mix of Ohio State, Michigan, out of conference, etc. And of course, Iowa made up that Michigan game in the title game.
I believe Wisconsin. Did Wisconsin go to Penn State?
Penn State at home.
Oh, it was in Madison.
Yeah.
Okay. Still though, that's a solid. I mean, Iowa played Penn State too. I understand that, but
I had Purdue 18, Minnesota 19, Wisconsin 20, and Iowa 21. I lined them all up in the order that I.
So you have a little bit more respect for Iowa than the AP poll, though. You certainly have more respect for those other Big Ten teams. You got more respect for Iowa than the AP.
I don't understand. BYU lost to UAB in a bowl game, and they're ranked 19th in the country. UAB. I don't understand this. You're Oregon.
Well, where's Oregon?
And Oregon's at 22, 1 spot ahead of Iowa. But there are group of 5 teams. And this is, I know this is difficult to do because I go through the exercise all the time, that you're trying to rank group of 5s. Not only is the Power 5 difficult to a certain extent, but for me, I've got a pretty good grasp on that. But once you start to look at the group of 5 and let's say a 10-3, let's say a 11-2 group of 5 team versus like a 9-4, how do you make that comparison? But if you really look at the results on the field between the group of 5 and the Power 5, the Power 5 wins 85% of the time. I've run the numbers many years. There's no comparison between the levels of play. So to me, I just don't even compare. Utah State's 10-3 and Minnesota's 9-4, and Utah State's getting ranked and Minnesota's not. That's ridiculous.
I think that's the and maybe we're too top heavy as far as how we, and I'm not saying, I say we, as far as the voters, top heavy as far as how they view strength of wins, because sometimes we like to say, and it's sort of what the NCAA tournament does to a different degree. But if you say, well, they played 3 really good teams. So if you look, for instance, Cincinnati played, would you say 2 really good teams before the playoff? Well, they played.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Houston, Notre Dame, right?
Yeah.
Am I missing anybody in there?
No.
But see, people will do that, and then you look at Iowa, and they say, well, Iowa's only good teams they played were Minnesota, and there was nobody else. But the fact of the matter is, cumulatively, Iowa's still, their schedule was ridiculously better. But again, that's why this is when we have humans doing this. That's why you're going to have these kinds of results.
I just
like coaches. I've always thought coaches, this is one thing I never understood about the coaches poll. The AP polls, whatever. The coaches poll. These are coaches, Mark. correct? These are that's how the polls operate. Am I missing something? So,
Well, the only disclaimer I'll put there, and I've been so detached for a long time, but when I was more involved, when I was covering the beat for 7 years in the SEC, and I had that day-to-day contact with sports information directors, I think for the most part, and every coach is different to a certain extent, I think they put their stamp of approval on whatever the SID wants to, you fill out my top 25, but make sure that Minnesota's below us and Wisconsin's below us and so-and-so's out. And there you go. You fill in the rest.
what a stupid setup. Why do we even have those polls? I mean, so ridiculous, but that doesn't surprise me. So anyways,
I'm going to shoot a video now that I'm looking at this and realizing that there's just so much confirmation between the levels of play in the group of five and the power five. Like Louisiana is a great example. They went 13-1. Good for them. That's great. They're a good football team, and they finished 16 in the AP. But this is typical when they played a Power 5 team, Texas. Texas is awful. Didn't make a bowl game. 1-5. They lost by 21 points. They lost by 3 touchdowns.
Last year when they went up to Ames, Mark.
Well, they did. Yeah, but that's just typical. I'm not just cherry picking. That's pretty typical.
Yeah, you're right. Well, as I've said,
so why are we ranking them? I ranked them too, but I did not rank them ahead of the likes of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Purdue. Just dumb.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Let's teach everybody a little something about algorithms and YouTube videos and whatnot, Mark. Your top 25 videos are probably your most popular pieces of content, correct? Throughout the season?
I thought we were going to get people to subscribe to your channel. That's where I thought we were headed.
Nice. That'd be nice too. Maybe I should start producing a top 25. I wouldn't want to compete with you, Mark, but would you say that's probably the most popular content throughout the year?
Consistently, yeah.
So if people love polls, I mean, as much as I think they're ridiculous, they love
and maybe not that I'm popular or my poll's so great, or which it's actually a ranking just to be technically correct. It's not a poll; it's one man's opinion. But it is, especially early in the season, quite controversial because people don't really understand my method. So it gains quite the response.
You get absolutely ripped for it. I mean, I've seen it. I saw it after the Michigan game, but man, you get absolutely torched for your takes. And I applaud you because sometimes you respond, but yeah, I think, yeah, again, I always say you're doing something right if you're getting criticized that much. And I do want to bring up one thing, because I know we're running out of time here, Mark.
And I will just say, for anyone who thinks I'm a homer, I ranked Ohio State lower than the AP in the coaches poll.
Where'd you have them?
6. Well, I guess they are 6 and they're 5 in the coaches poll.
Yeah, and Cincinnati, you ranked at 7. I saw somebody crying about that on your channel.
Yeah.
But again, I think that's being generous to Cincinnati. But based on resume, it's hard not to. But it's a tough thing when you're trying to weigh group of 5. And I know you flush out all the data and whatnot. So it takes more work than probably the AP voters and the coaches poll voters actually do, right? I mean, can we just be honest? You and I both know these voters are not doing much work to actually vote. So
no.
I did want to bring up real quick, Mark, the news that broke earlier this week that Dane Belton did declare for the draft, which is big news because I know somebody had commented on social media last week after Riley Moss. By the way, people started ripping me last week because I had said that Riley Moss was gone. He had accepted an invite to the Senior Bowl. I was not aware that you could unaccept an invite. In fact, the NFL Network, the night before he changed his mind, the NFL Network had a Senior Bowl special, and they were running through all these, and they literally highlighted Riley Moss and like showed a highlight reel of him and where he's going to go in the draft. It was such a weird thing. I just have never heard of somebody accepting a Senior Bowl invite and then opting out. So, I mean, more power to him that you can do that. I think it's probably fair. So he'll be back, but somebody made the comment that the defense would be stacked. And I think I don't know about stacked because they're losing Kerner, they're losing Belton, they're losing Hankins, they're losing Van Valkenburg. So I think there are still question marks. I don't want to use the word stacked yet. I do think as far as replacing Belton, Xavier Wampa, who played in the senior or the All-American Bowl on Saturday, I think he's got an excellent chance of playing right away, particularly not just because of who he is, but because he's going to be here this spring. So he's got an opportunity by enrolling early to possibly be that cash guy. Maybe he replaces Jack Kerner. But the bottom line is Belton's a big loss. I think he's the best defensive back on this team. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes in the 3rd or 4th round. I'm no draft expert, but he's a really good defensive back. They're going to miss him. Again, we'll see where he tests out of the combine. But I think Iowa has got some pieces. Quinn Schulte, Sebastian Castro. I don't think those guys are probably cash candidates, but they're definitely candidates to get some playing time at safety. And then they've got several other guys coming in at defensive back in this 2022 recruiting class. So Belton's a hit, but I thought we should at least touch on that before we
Absolutely. And we also want to make sure that we honor and recognize anybody who gives in the super chat, especially. So Springtime is telling us that that they contributed there in the super chat, but I went backwards all the way to the top of the, I don't know if you can see it there, Corey, but we want to make sure that we get that. So we thank you for that, but I do not see it.
I do not see it either. And I'm keeping an eye on the comments just like Mark is throughout the show. So perhaps
I went all the way to the top of the screen to the very first comment. So we apologize if somehow we missed that, but
yeah, check your YouTube account because it'll have it in there if you, right,
yeah.
Mark?
Here we go. I guess it's popping up now. So there we've got.
Thank you, Springtime. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much for that. All right, very good. We do this each and every Tuesday at 4:30 Central Time, everyone. Iowa football talk for 60 minutes with you. So please come on back and bring some other football fans with you, preferably Iowa fans, but we've got all sorts of different fan bases represented here. So come on back and bring your friends and your family and let them know that we're here covering Iowa football specifically every Tuesday at 4:30 Eastern Time. And Corey with Iowa football and basketball over on From the Hawkeye of the Storm.
Should mention that for everybody again. Help us get to 1,000 over at the From the Hawkeye of the Storm channel. Let me. Oh, you got it right there. Yeah, we have our Iowa postgame with Coach Gary Close. So we'll be on live after Iowa, Indiana Thursday, which is an 8 p.m. Central game. So another late postgame, 10 p.m. Central time for Coach Close and I. And then also for everybody who's a football fan, we kind of mentioned this during our show last week, but we'll be doing a Iowa football wrap-up show with Coach Don Patterson. I know everybody's going to want to be there. This is the last show of the season with Don. So be there or be square this Sunday, 7 p.m. right here at this channel. So we tried to, we've been trying to be consistent. When we do schedule a Sunday show, it's usually at 7 p.m. And I think we'll get a big turnout, Mark. I know people are real appreciative of what Don has been able to offer this year, as I know you have been, and certainly myself. So I'm looking forward to that final show. We'll take calls and chats as we always do. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, he's one impressive guy, that is for sure. And between he and Corey, they provide excellent content both here and over on From the Hawkeye of the Storm. And also, even though the game's complete, what we talked about off the top with the Alabama and Georgia metrics, want to just let everyone know that was released a short time before kickoff. So not a lot of people gravitated to that. But if you're really into football metrics, advanced metrics, even though the game's over, check it out over on the main channel.
And for anybody who's wondering, why did we wait till 6:30 to premiere that? That was Don Patterson. And you may laugh at that and say, well, that's not a big deal. Don is very, very concerned with the integrity of the game. And when he saw that Alabama had won all 5 of those parameters in the SEC championship game, I'm talking about the top 5 parameters for those two teams that were essential to win-loss. When he saw that, he thought, I don't really want to have any chance of sharing that too early, and then somehow it gets back to to Georgia. And again, you may laugh and say that no, Georgia doesn't care. Well, Kirk Ferentz gets these analytics every week he sits down in his office with Don Patterson every week. So this is information that most colleges have an analyst and an analytics guy that helps them with this stuff. So he just wanted to provide it for people to be able to enjoy the game to a better degree, but also he didn't want to take any chance of it. Because again, it's not that he was rooting for Alabama, but if Alabama took the time to work to get these analytics, why give it away to a team that maybe didn't? But Georgia found a way to do it despite the 5-0 advantage that Alabama had in the last contest.
Maybe Don in his last sit down should go over Spencer Petrus's efficiency rating, 109th in the country.
It's funny. I'll just say one more thing, Mark. I've as we've talked about transfer portal quarterbacks, I don't remember one quarterback that has entered the portal that has started at either the FBS or at the FBS level. I'll just stick with the FBS, and I'm talking Marshall Wells, the kid from or not Marshall Wells, kid from
Grant.
Marshall. There you go. Is it Grant Wells? I think it's Grant Wells from Marshall, and he of course is headed to Virginia Tech. But him as an example, and the kid from Wyoming. I mean, you can go across the board. I haven't seen any metrics that would say that any of these starting quarterbacks had a worse passer rating than what Iowa did. I'm not talking about just Spencer. I'm talking cumulatively the quarterback room, what they did this year. So that would tell me that if you go after a starter in the portal, I know it's a different system and that does play a role, but there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be upgrading. So that's why I've been so pro portal this year. Never been it before, but because of the lack of quarterback play. I'm glad you brought the passer rating thing up because that is something I've observed.
All right, everyone. One more time. We're here every Tuesday at 4:30 Central Time, and get on over to the From the Hawkeye of the Storm right here on YouTube and join Corey's football and basketball coverage there. All right, Corey.
Thanks, Mark. We'll talk to you next Tuesday.
Thank you.